Put a word in for Steve Kiefer, our lead guy, and Woody for coming all the way over from Indiana. I'm glad y'all. Thank you. I told Gary I thought it'd be worth mentioning tonight as we're starting off. We're going to have our flag ceremony. I don't know how many recognize it. Many of you probably do. It was actually kind of embarrassing for me to say, but it was on Facebook that I realized this when I started looking into it. This month marks the 200th anniversary of a fairly important time in our history in the United States. 200 years ago, on the night of September 13, 1814, the vast majority of the British naval fleet was off the shore of Baltimore, Maryland, near Fort McHenry. At that time, they had already taken Washington, D.C., burned most of our government buildings, and chased President Madison out of the White House, burning the White House down behind him. And their goal was to take the city of Baltimore. That was a very, very important city to the United States at that time. Well, in the time that they had spent traveling from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, of course, the British military had taken several prisoners along the way and were holding them offshore on their ships. A lawyer by the name of Francis Scott Key was out in the Chesapeake Bay. His job was to meet with those British admirals and the British generals and try to secure the release specifically of a doctor named Dr. Beans, who had been treating both Americans and British, and we felt like he was being held unfairly. Francis Scott Key, along with his compatriot, another lawyer by the name of Skinner, they were fairly successful, and the British agreed that, yes, some of these POWs should be released. However, we are not going to release any of you until after this little battle that we're about to have. Our plan is to shell Fort McHenry, and we're going to take Fort McHenry and then move up the river, and we'll shell the city of Baltimore, and then Baltimore will give up, and you'll all be under British rule, and we're going to let you go anyhow. So Francis Scott Key and the other lawyer Skinner and Dr. Beans and these other POWs were being held under the watch of the Royal British Marines out in the Chesapeake Bay on the evening of September 13, 1814, and into the morning hours of September 14, 1814. And what they witnessed from the Chesapeake Bay was the shelling of Fort McHenry. And as all of the rockets from the ships flew overhead, and all of the bombs that went ashore from the big guns on these British naval ships, as they would fly overhead and burst in air near the ramparts of Fort McHenry, they were able to see that our flag, the United States flag, overnight was still flying at Fort McHenry. Now, that flag that they saw overnight was 17 feet tall and 25 feet long, a fairly good-sized flag. But as the evening wore on and the dawn was approaching, the shelling stopped. And what Francis Scott Key and none of these POWs or anyone on the ship knew, besides the British, was why did the shelling stop? And when the shelling stopped and the rockets stopped flying overhead, they weren't able to see, was the flag still there? If the flag was down, that meant that the fort had given up, and the Americans had given up to those British soldiers that were on the shore waiting to move in and take the fort over. So they had to wait until the dawn broke on the morning of the 14th of September, 1814, to know if that flag was still flying. You can imagine how much these men wanted to know, was that flag still there? They had no way to affect it, but it was very, this is the United States of America. Are we, is Baltimore going to fall? What they saw when the dawn broke on the morning of the 14th September was not that flag that they saw the night before. It was the garrison flag. The garrison flag was 30 feet tall and 42 feet long on a 90-foot tall flagpole. That flag had been commissioned by the commander of Fort McHenry several weeks earlier because he knew that the British fleet was coming. They had already been to Washington, D.C. They were coming. They were going to shell Fort McHenry. And he wanted those British sailors and the British admiralty to know damn good and well that our flag is still flying the next morning. So when he was, Francis Scott Key, he was an amateur poet. And so from his experiences that night and on his way back into Baltimore, he penned a poem that he entitled In Defense of Fort McHenry. And the words of the poem In Defense of Fort McHenry were set to of all things, a British drinking song called To Anachronon in Heaven. And that combination of the poem and the tune became what we know today as the Star-Spangled Banner. And sometime later, it was adopted as our national anthem. But I thought it was worth mentioning tonight that this is the 200th anniversary this month of that event, a very pivotal time in our history of the United States. So think about that. Pass it along to your family if you think you have family members that may not remember that. It is worth mentioning. The Battle of 1812 was a trying time for a young nation. So, without further ado, we will move into your ceremony.
Thank you, Lee. We could have everybody stand for invocation, please. I'd like to introduce Pete Winkler.
We're going to just take a moment tonight to quietly remember those in the blacksmithing community that have passed on, and mentors and friends that aren't able to join us tonight. So if you would just, we'll take a moment of silence here before we pray. Lord God, you've made the heavens and the earth by your great power, and nothing is too difficult for you. Tonight as we gather, we ask just your grace and protection upon each of those that are demonstrating over the course of these next couple of days. We pray the same for those that are participating in these events and in these demonstrations, traveling mercies on those coming and going, and grace upon the SOFA staff here facilitating this awesome event for us. And lastly, tonight, we remember those in our armed services who stand in harm's way, protecting our freedoms and holding up our great flag. We pray all these things in the name of Jesus, and everybody says, Amen.
Thank you, Pete. Now the presentation of the colors of the United States of America by the Miami Valley Young Marines.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Thank you, sir. Forward, march.
Very good. At this time, I'd like to make sure that we recognize all the volunteers that helped make this happen this weekend. All the volunteers that have helped pull this off. If you can raise your hand, please. How many of you are here this year who weren't here last year? Awesome. Wow. Very cool. Good job. Good job. It's always great to see lots of new people here, lots of new faces. Was there anybody here tonight that was here last year for the first time? And you had a great time, right? All right. Very good. Very good. So that's our testament for what's going to happen this weekend. We've switched some things around, I think, as most of you know by now, a little bit. All for the good. Change is good, except for I haven't been able to get rid of my position yet, so we're still working on that. But I have seen a few youngsters running around here, so maybe here in the next year or so we can make that happen. At this time, I'd like to recognize Larry Wood. I saw him here earlier. He's probably hiding behind there. For those of you who don't know who Larry Wood is, he is our last original founding father of Southern Ohio Forge and Anvil. So if you get a chance, talk to him, share a little bit with him, and just tell him what a good time you're having here. I'm sure it'll make him feel really good about being here this weekend. Also, I'd like to take a minute to recognize all the SOFA board members, if you all come out here. If anything goes wrong this weekend, so, wow, that's a pretty good looking board. So, Mike Roberts, the chairman of Quadstate this year, director. The most important thing you're going to do this weekend is remind Michael what a great job he's done, right?
Yeah,
Only because I don't want to do it next year. And Eric Bruner, Vice President, Southern Ohio Forge and Anvil. Steve Roth. Frank Woolley. Of course, Larry Wood. Mike Brennan. Bob Cruikshank. Joel Worley. And Daryl Painter. Oh, and Daryl, or I'm sorry, and Brian. Brian was hiding back there in the back. Sorry about that. That's always the trouble with introducing anybody if you forget somebody. Oh yeah, you guys are standing right behind me. I'm sorry. See, that's what I mean. Mike Bono here. He's secretary treasurer. And that is the problem with having so many people and accidentally missing somebody. You know, our mission here is to always recognize everybody for all the work that they do, or people that we've come in contact that have helped, been demonstrators here in the past. But it's hard to do that sometimes, and because if we miss somebody, it's certainly not on purpose. It's an accident. So if we've ever missed anybody, it is purely accidental. At this time, I would like to especially recognize two guys that have worked on Quadstate with us in the past. I'm not sure how long, 10 years, 8 years, 10 years, long time. Steve Roth and Frank Woolley. 10 years of really good, hard service, not only to Quadstate, but just the day-to-day events. Anytime. They're all pointing at you, Steve. That's and Steve, of course, is a very integral part, but so are you, Frank. You've helped us a lot, especially whenever we have an electrical problem. Frank always gets the call, and we appreciate that. So thank you for all your efforts in the past with Quadstate. And having said that, I feel a little bit bad about recognizing them and not recognizing Brian. Prior to that, Brian was the Quadstate coordinator. I'm not sure he's ever been recognized for that, so I want to make sure we did that tonight. Let's see. Oh yeah, we're going to do something a little bit different this year. I would say something like it's gone to the dogs, but that would be totally. We're going to have a photo contest. What we're trying to do is reach out to you, the people, the members, and ask for some photos specifically of Quadstate this year. So you can take them with your phone, you can take them with your cameras, send them to the website. And here's what we're going to do. If you can send up to 5 photos. Those 5 photos need to also have a written caption with them. And we need to have them in 30 days from today. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut it off after 30 days. The board is going to go through all those photos. The board is going to pick what we believe is the best photo and best captures the event this weekend. And when you're going to lose. And whoever wins, we're going to take that photo then and put it on the front page of the very next newsletter. And then we'll probably use some of the other photos we were given. What we're trying to do is get some of your side of your story in the newsletter for everybody to see. We're really trying to reach out to you and get some input from you for that. So you're not only going to get your photograph that you took in the caption or the little story you've written in the newsletter, we're also going to give the winner 1 free entry to Quadstate for next year. So that's a pretty good incentive. So get your cameras out. Remember, only 5. We don't want to get deluged with too much. It's going to be a lot of work to go through all those. But we'll be looking for them. And then I would expect everybody's gotten their new newsletters, I hope. We've produced 2 of them now since the beginning of the summer. We had a little bit of a lax there with them, and I apologize for that, but we've taken care of that completely now. So any questions on the photo contest? We'll go ahead and move on. Are all the demonstrators in here? They're always also shy. All right. Well, I am not going to stand in front of the demonstrators. They are the most important people here. I'd like to introduce in Area A, Heather McClarty and Jan Aegean. Happy birthday. And I don't sing very well. If Lee was here, I'm sure he'd sing too. No. Okay, next is Clay Spencer and Dave Custer. Dan Nichols and Derek Bliss. Mace Vital and Sam Salvati. Now, I've watched Mace forge before, and it's really interesting. He's the only guy that I've ever seen forge a knife with a baseball bat, and he can do it. And John King, he'll be handling our hands-on instruction. And then last but certainly not least is Patrick Nowak. He'll be doing this evening's program for you. I think having said that, I've gotten through all of our business stuff, and I think if you folks want to go ahead and grab a seat, sit down, and we can go ahead and turn it over to Patrick for this evening's program. And I can promise you this will be up. Here's the photo. Yeah, you're in trouble. All right, I can promise you you'll have a great weekend this weekend, and I hope that I can stand in front of you here next year if I get to do this and see everybody that's here tonight here next year. So, thank you.
Okay, can everybody hear me? No. Is that better? Here we go. All right, first of all, let me say, wow. Oh my goodness, wow. We can't do this without you, and I am very pleased that all of you have shown up. I sort of got conned into being in charge this time. You don't show up at a meeting, and this is what happens. And you know, I've been working on Quadstate for many, many years behind the scenes, and when you don't screw up, they keep giving you more and more responsibility, and we ended up here. And I'm like, what are we going to do this year? I've always been interested in young and upcoming Smiths or new talent and their mentors. That's what this weekend's about. And the Friday night demo is always one of the most difficult things to put together. So, you know, I kicked this around for so long, and I'm like, wait a minute, who helped me get into smithing? And it was Patrick. Patrick is largely responsible for me being here today. So I shoot him an email, and I'm like, you know, Patrick, you're the one who put my foot on this path and brought me to this point. How about you share my pain? I mean, my responsibility. And Patrick, being the great guy that he is, jumped in on both feet and helped me plan this program. Now, I have to tell one more story before we get started. This is how I got into smithing. I was interested in it for a very long time. I had trouble meeting people. I was in Columbus, trouble making connections. I found these guys on the internet, and I was talking with Patrick for a long time. Well, they said, meet up at this one place, and we're going to Patrick's house, which was several hours away. I get there, and nobody's there. They'd already left. They didn't know I was supposed to be there. So I finally get directions. I'm on my way there. These guys are mad because they didn't know I was going to show up, and I'm mad because everybody left me. So I'm standing around at Patrick's going, gee, this is fun. I'm not going to learn anything, right? And I'm hiding in the corner. Patrick and his lovely wife, Melody, went out of their way after everybody had left to make me get in the forge, to explain things to me. They were very friendly. They are very creative. That sounds a little bit familiar. Creative and friendly. That's what SOFA's all about. I thank Patrick for his help getting me here. He is a wonderful person, and this is going to be an awesome show.
Thanks, Mike. All right. Am I mic now? Is it working? Okay, good. Well, what we're going to do tonight is make a hammer, which isn't really all that unusual, except that this hammer is what we're going to make. So that's a little different. This is a 14-pound French pattern sledgehammer that a friend of mine owns, and I've admired it in his shop for a long time. And so when Mike asked if I could do the demo, I said, well, what should we make? And we talked about a few things, and I wanted it to be reasonably interesting. And there's a lot of guys who make hammers and do a really good job, but I'd not ever seen one quite like this before, so I thought we would try it, largely because it's got some different tooling requirements than other hammers that I've seen. So hopefully tonight you'll see a bunch of different tools, or maybe used in a little different way. And Mike had a vision that we would get the board members to help out with this, so at some point he's going to start telling them to come up and help me, which I hope is soon. All right then. Thanks. I have some metal in the fire already getting hot, but what we're going to start with is a piece of 3 1/4 round, and that takes a little while to get warm. We actually had that going in the fire before the meeting started, but this is a blank of what we're going to be working with, so that's going to take a little while to get hot. And while that's warming up, I guess I'll just start by introducing myself a little bit. I've been coming to SOFA since I was a sophomore in college, and the guy I get to blame, just like Mike just blame me for where he's at, there's a fellow named Thomas Powers around here. Thomas, where are you? I know you're here. Where are you hiding? Right there he is. All right, there's Thomas. As long as I've known Thomas, he's had horns on his head. I don't think I ever see Thomas without his horns. I wouldn't recognize him. He showed me a picture of his passport card today, and I said, yeah, that doesn't look like you, Thomas. There's no horns. Anyway, I met Thomas when I was a student. I was really interested in blacksmithing, much like Mike. I had read about it, I knew about it, had never done it. My interest had been in doing knife work, and I had been making knives since I was a junior in junior high school. Actually, the very first knife I made, I was in 2nd grade. I took it upstairs and out of the basement and showed my dad, hey, look, Dad, look what I made. And he goes, that's really cool. I have to take it away. You can't play with that. It's too sharp. So I waited a few more years and got a little more responsible, and then I actually learned how to make knives and do it the right way. And then that exposed me to some metallurgy and the understanding a little bit of alloy selection for knives versus for other applications. And I got really interested in that. I thought, well, I should go to school for that. So I did. I went to school. I became a metallurgical engineer. And while I was a student, I met Thomas. Thomas was very involved in Renaissance reenactments and still is. The university at the time held a one-day event every spring. And that year it was really rainy and the weather was bad. And so the whole event was inside except for Thomas, who was outside in the rain forging with some friends. And so I went out and hung out with Thomas, and I was really interested. Nobody else was around, so he was like, hey, do you want to make something? Well, yeah, I'd love to make something. So he brought me in, and we made a little campfire fork for doing hot dogs, and then we did a little squirrel tail knife where you make the handle out of the tang all one piece and bend it around. And that was really a lot of fun, and I had to go and run down to the local UDF to get some oil so we could quench it because he didn't have any quenching oil that day. I still have that knife. It's hanging on the wall of the shop. And then he said, you know, I'm going to be doing a demo at a public library in a few weeks. Would you like to come along? I said, sure, that'd be great. So he picked me up. I didn't have a car or anything at the time. He picked me up and we went down there. And my real interest at the time was learning how to do Damascus for blades. And so that day he had some Damascus builds and he showed me how to do that. And I did a lot of Damascus and a lot of blades with Thomas over the years since then. After a few years, I got a little bit away from knife work and more into ornamental work and a lot of tool work. I took a job after I graduated. I worked for Timken for a couple of years up in Canton. Learned a lot about bearings and bearing making and heat treating of bearings and stuff. And then 11 years ago, I had a chance to move out to southern Wisconsin, and now I work at a company called Scott Forge. And it would have been a good idea if I'd have brought a laptop and the internet and I could have showed you Scott Forge's website, because I can't do it with just my voice and hand motions. If you have internet access, take time and go visit scottforge.com and be awed by what they do. I worked there 11 years. I'm still awed every day I go in the shop. They make large open die forgings, which is basically what we're going to do at the anvils. Open die, we're not using closed tools, but we make forgings that way up to 100,000 pounds. In the shop where I work, we have 3 presses, hydraulic presses, 1,250 ton, 2,000 ton, 3,000 ton. In another shop that I sometimes get into, we have press up to 5,500 tons, and we're in the process of building 2 more presses, one 10,000 tons, another 16,000 tons. So it's a lot of fun. In my role at work, I am focused on the technical aspects of forging, not so much the ornamental side, but how do you forge to get the requirements that a customer needs? How do you heat treat to get those same things? And so I work a lot with steel mills, I work with our forging crews, I work with our heat treating shop to accomplish all those things. In my work at home, I do a lot of mokame gane, which is sort of the copper and non-ferrous version of Damascus. I have a customer who sends me blocks of mokame that he's already made up and has me just forge them to new sizes and twist them if needed or whatever. And I've done that for the last probably 5 or 6 years. And on the average, I probably run about 1,000 pounds a year of mokame through my shop, forging usually to very tight dimensional tolerances. And so I have really focused my efforts on the technical aspects of forging. How do you produce something that, in this case, my customer wants, that's going to have minimal waste, minimal distortion of the pattern, since that's the aesthetic part of mokame, and not have some of the problems that you can get if you forge incorrectly. And a lot of those things that I do in my shop at home mimic what happens at work. So I can take things that I've made at home into work to illustrate certain principles if I'm trying to teach somebody at work about how you forge, how you use the relationship between dies, die size, die bites, drafts, things like that to control how metal flows, and I can illustrate that with my own work. So this hammer project is sort of an extension of that for me. It's figuring out how the tooling and how to take starting material and get it to where we want it to go. Now, how are we doing on heat? Is that one ready to go? All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to start this by hand, but to do that, I need some help, and this is where the board members and Mike get to participate. We're going to start with just sort of an oversized smithing magician style of tool, and we're going to forge, or fuller rather, these radiuses here. What happens in this, when you make this hammer, you start with 3 1/4 diameter bar. You forge in a radius. Basically, we would at work a shape like this would be called a dumbbell, where the center is smaller in cross section than the ends. So this center section is taken down to 2 3/8 square, and the radius in here is 2 1/4 inch diameter. So trying to forge 2 1/4 inch diameter radiuses by hand is pretty challenging. So what we're going to do is start with 1.5 inches. So this tool here has 1.5 inch radius on it. We'll start with that. I've built in a little stop on this tool that puts me 2 inches from the end of my workpiece. And for this hammer, that would work out to give me about a 1 inch flat here before my radius starts. The hammers that we're going to make are slightly smaller than that, so we'll still have 1 inch, but our center section will be just a little shorter. Once we get done with that part, we're going to switch to a second set of tools that have a bigger radius. These have the 2 1/4 inch diameter fullers, and so we'll move to those, and we'll rough this in a top and bottom fuller approach, like so. And once the hammers are all roughed in, then we punch the eye and go through heat treatment. So if that one's hot, we'll start with that. How are we doing on temperature there? Let me see. Well, that's okay. We can start. But, pardon me? What is the alloy? We're going to be working with 4130. I suppose I should introduce my surprise. Mike doesn't know I'm going to do this. But Mike, when Mike met me, I was doing a lot of Damascus. I mentioned that earlier. So I thought it would be kind of a fun deal to try and make this hammer out of Damascus. But to try to do that in front of you guys would be not something that I want to attempt. So I made the hammer complete except for punch in the eye.
Wow.
We can pass that around.
Wow.
We'll get to that at the end.
We're going to start this over here. This is crazy. Okay. For those of you who don't know Patrick, Patrick suffers from some disease where if it's not incredibly huge, he can't work on it. So bigger is definitely better. So when we're getting started off on this, we're going to have the big dog, Larry Woods, come in here and start off this project for us. So Larry. Will that work for you? Okay. Where's your what? Where's your sledge? Yeah, I don't know what we're going to do with that one. All right. So
Which hammer did you want to use, Larry? I've got a few, and welcome.
let me give you a little
found
bit
what
of
you
history
like.
about
Okay,
Larry.
good.
Larry's been around in the blacksmithing community almost
Take what you can
since
give me.
the beginning of
I
the
like it,
revival.
Sure.
1973, approximately
Still look good.
47 years.
Wait for him.
He
Yeah,
started
wait for him
off
to
at
quit
Emmerich
talking.
Studebakers. He, well, I asked Larry, I said, what do you like working on? The first thing out of his mouth was
Thank you.
women. Then he told me I'm not allowed to
No, I
say
made
that,
it.
so.
Yeah. We'll probably talk about that a
Anyways,
little
he
later,
does a
but
lot
yeah,
of
it's all the
traditional
fabricated
smithing.
anvil,
He's
hard
done some lighting. Larry is one of my personal
I
inspirations.
didn't forge it.
He's
It's
talked to
actually
me a
forged
lot.
out of some
He's
heavy plate
inspired
there.
me. He is truly a blacksmithing treasure. Some of the people who have influenced Larry and helped him get on this path: Francis Whitaker, Jed Nelson, Hans Piot, all great people in the blacksmithing community. So, whenever you gentlemen are ready, we are ready. Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Woods. Thank you, Larry.
The challenge with big material is that it takes a long time to heat. So I've got to come up with a story to make the demo work. And since I don't know very many jokes, and I'm an okay storyteller, but we'd be much better if I had questions from you to fill in this time while we're getting steel hot. So, are there any questions to start with?
Tell us about the anvil.
Tell you about the anvil, okay? The anvil is one that I made. It weighs just over 1,000 pounds. It was fabricated from 3 plates of steel that were about 16 inches wide and 49 inches long. And I had a local friend of mine, Keen Perdiso, who may be here tonight. I'm not sure if he's around. He has a programmable torch table, so he flame cut the silhouette for me, and I did a lot of the initial welding in his shop. It's basically seam welded right down the middle and all the way down and around to the bottom.
No, Frank's
and then
next,
there's
then
a base
Gary,
plate that's
then
an
Eric,
inch and a half thick that's
then you.
on the bottom, and then all of this area here is all welded in with just little pieces of scrap and welding rod and so forth. And then The top here and on this square tapered horn is hard-faced with a Hobart product called Hardalloy 58, which is, it's not a super wear-resistant rod. It's a sort of an imbalance between being hard and wear-resistant. You can grind it pretty easily, but it lays down pretty hard. When I did that work, I preheated the whole anvil, because when you're dealing with rods like that, if you don't do that, they'll crack. So I got the anvil. It was probably 700 or 800 degrees. I got some burners from a friend of mine, set it out in the driveway, wrapped it all up in kale wool, and just put the burners on it for a couple of hours in the middle of Wisconsin winter. Got it really hot. Well, it was when I had a whole day that I could sit there and just weld. It was over Christmas vacation, so I got it hot, and I sat there in front of the anvil for 7 hours running hard face rod across it, and wrapped it back up and went inside and came back. It was still hot the next day. So
after looking at this, does anybody believe that he doesn't have this sickness? This is 1,050 pounds. That's crazy.
it was actually copied off of one that I saw for sale here a number of years ago. One of the regular tailgaters had a period piece from England that weighed about 700 pounds in this style. I really liked it, and so when I got a hold of the material for it, material I had access to happened to be a little bigger, and so it ended up being 1,000 pounds instead of the 700 pounds that the other one was.
Is this the one we're working on?
I'm not disappointed.
Okay. Anytime you're ready.
All right, is that ready? Is that hot? Okay.
Okay. Something I forgot to say about Larry is he's director emeritus. He was the first one, which means he has lifetime position on the board of directors for SOFA.
How are we doing for heat?
Frank Worley decided he was going to say, well, I've had enough of you guys, I'm retiring. So we said, aha, we're going to fix you. We made him director
Let's put that
emeritus
back
also.
in. Let's put some
So
more air
Frank,
into it.
where you at?
All right, yeah, that's good and hot on that side, but we're going to want to really, we need it hot. It's a big chunk.
There you go. Well, Frank's been blacksmithing for 35 plus years. He started out at Emmett Studebakers also. Frank likes doing ornamental work. Some of his influence, his mentors have been Francis Whitaker, Larry Woods, Barry Wheeler. He's been on the board since 1995, and he's been vice president for 19 years. I think Frank has really
Just keep going. Just keep going.
worked around the club as much or more than anybody. And I think he likes fixing things, so he brings in all these tools for new guys to break just so he can have something to do in his spare time.
All right, that's good. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, Frank Worley.
You heard Frank? All right, get that thing hot.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Michael.
You're next. You're next.
So are there any other questions? We talked about the anvil.
All right.
Any other questions?
All right.
What kind of tools do I use? Well, my favorite tool is a power hammer. I have a big power hammer at home. I really like that because it lets me do a lot of work really fast. So I can get a lot done in a short period of time. But if I don't, let's see, what my second, you can use that.
Can you use that?
Absolutely.
All right.
Oh, I have to use the biggest hammer.
Well, we'll use this one then here.
Not sure if I can put
No?
this is
Okay. So that's one tool. The anvil's another tool. I have lots of different tools, and you'll see a lot of them that I use tonight. We'll have punches and drifts for making different parts of the anvil. We've got fullering tools, all different kinds. But this was a question, one of the guys that I learned from, who is also here somewhere, Paul Ailing, I don't know if Paul's around. But Paul was a blacksmith at the Ohio Historical Society for a long time. And he used to get class groups, students that would come in, and they would ask him questions about his tools. And what tool do you use? What's your favorite tool? What's your most important tool, right? And his response to that question, and I think it's a good one, was his mind. This is the most important tool because you have to understand how to use any of these other tools with your head, with your mind. How's the metal going to work? What's it going to do? And, you know, especially like in my job at work where we have large things, being able to see in your head what's going to happen when you push on one spot, where the metal's going to go, is extremely important. Because if you don't do it right, you might have a forging which you can't ship to your customer. So being able to see ahead of time what's going to happen in a number of different situations, and then planning and selecting the right method to get the outcome you want is really, really important. It's a fantastic question. Any other questions? Yeah. Where would you use a 100,000-pound forging? That's a really good question. So large forgings like that are used in some military applications, some aerospace applications. Actually, you'll find that the folks who are building the satellites and the rockets today all test those rocket engines in land-based test stands before they ever put them onto something that's going to go into outer space. That requires a lot of fuel. So the big fuel storage tanks are very large, hollow shell forgings. They don't go anywhere. They're just big stationary things, but they're under a lot of pressure. They're holding things like liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen and other really explosive materials, so they need very good integrity. So they're forged out of big stainless steel forgings. Another application for really large forgings like that is in the nuclear power industry, where nuclear reactor shells are forged. Great big, enormous hollow forgings. In fact, there's some companies overseas that can do forgings which are much bigger than anything we can handle here in the States. The biggest single piece of steel that I've ever seen a picture of, this is not fabricated, this was a casting, an ingot, weighed 630 tons. So think about 630 tons, right? So that ingot was laying on its side, and there was a little guy standing next to it. I mean, say little, it was a fellow from Japan, so he was a little shorter than me. But the ingot was still twice the diameter of his height and quite long. And that ingot was, like I say, 600 tons. And they're using, you know, forging presses of 14,000 or 18,000 ton capacity to change the shape of that into whatever it is they need. But nuclear power, or even conventional power, you know, all of the turbines are forged for the generators. A lot of oil and gas rigs have a lot of the offshore oil rigs have a lot of structural components, big gears and rack and pinion gears to drive the legs of what they call a jack-up rig. They can float it out and have it go into water that's a few hundred feet deep and have great big legs that jack down into the ocean floor. So all the gearing and racks are all forged on those. A lot of the tooling that goes down what they call downhole tooling to go into a well is forged. It's a product that we make that's, is it ready? All right. Well, let's let Mike introduce somebody else. Right. Hey, it's Gary.
All right.
Where is my...
The next demonstrator we have is Gary Ward. He is our esteemed president. Gary always overdresses for the occasion. Now, Gary is a phenomenon, unbelievable. I have seen him work all day at a forge, not break a sweat, and not have a speck of dirt on him. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I walk by the shop, I am covered in dirt. Gary is amazing. Now, I will say that recently we took a knife making class together, and he actually broke a sweat, but I think it was like 120 degrees. Gary has been smithing since 1997. He has been on the board since 99. He likes general blacksmithing. and Larry Wood has been his personal mentor. They started out at Emmett's, and Larry has taught him. Gary is also of the school where the bigger is better, so he had to pick up the biggest hammer here in order to beat on this thing. He's doing a wonderful job. Gary Ward.
How many more board members do we have to go through?
Pardon me?
So how many more board members do you want to get to?
Well, all of them.
All right, which is
2, 3, 4. So,
questions? What do we have in the gas forge? I'll pull that out in a minute, but it's a continuation of the project we're working on. Yes, young man. Well, there's two ways to know. One, when the striker gets tired, and two, when the metal's so cold that it won't move anymore. Yeah. Okay, so the question was, how important has the education that I've had been in letting me attain the goals that I have, right? And I would say that for me, that's been really important. The engineering background, the metallurgy background, I wouldn't be able to do what I do at Scott Forge without that. What I do in my shop at home, could I do that without a metallurgy background? Yeah, probably I could. I wouldn't be able to do it as effectively though. Because I have a metallurgy background, then when I go to do welding, when I go to do hard facing, if I go to heat treat something, when I say that we're working with 4130 or 4340 or some other material, I have an idea of what that means, not just not just the composition, but what it means from a handling standpoint, forging temperatures, heat treating temperatures, tempering temperatures. So my education really dovetails very well into what I do for fun, and is certainly extremely important for what I do as a career. A really good question. Any other? Yes? Okay, so the question is, in the industrial forging shop, what kind of tolerances do we forge to? Basically, how much machine stock would we leave on a part, right? So in general, for something that's finished on a press, it scales a little bit with size. The bigger forgings will have a little bit more stock, but you're going to see stock allowances between about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch on a diameter, right? There's usually pretty tight. The presses they're controlled by people. They have, the operator has a lever that, makes the press go up and down, but he is able to dial in through electronics a 0 point or some intermediate set point, so that if he needs to forge to 10 inch, he can zero the top die against the bottom die and then dial in 10 inches, and he knows that it's not going to go any smaller than 10 inches. Yeah. Okay, so a simple question. How do you heat a 100-ton forging? Well, instead of having a gas forge that's this big, I have a gas forge that goes from about here to that group of people over there, and to, the second row of bleachers. But and it's just lined with fiber, and it has a cast hearth and a big steel frame to hold it all together. The nice thing about what I do at work is that it's exactly the same thing as what I do at home, except magnified. The tooling is the same, basically. We don't have anvils with horns on them like this, but we have flat dies. We have some shaped dies. We have V dies. I brought a V tool over here for my anvil. I don't need this for this particular demo, but it's a tool I use a lot at home. If I want to make a hollow forging and I want to taper that hollow forging, I can do that with a V-die. Well, we do the same thing at work with V-dies on the presses. So everything is really basically the same, just magnified. Instead of tongs, I mean, we have some tongs, but those are used to hold tools. The forgings aren't held with tongs primarily. They're held with things called manipulators, which are 2-story tall trucks that you can drive around that have massive jaws on the front. And so you can drive right up to one of these giant furnaces and grab it, take it where you need it to go.
Eric,
Oh, watch yourself.
everybody know Tim Nepshield? He's one of the guys who does a lot of the work around here and actually makes things happen and let us put on these shows. Wave, Tim. Hey. All right, this is Eric Bruner. He is our esteemed vice president. He's also my buddy, so I'm going to embarrass him.
Go ahead.
There we go. Woo. Let me tell you a story how he became vice president. We're driving down here to a SOFA meeting, and he's like, I think they're going to nominate me for vice president. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it. I swear, I'm not going to do it. This is never going to happen, right? So
Eric,
we're in the
back
board
hand on the
meeting, and
floor.
Gary goes,
Eric, stop.
gee, Eric,
Back
I would
hand on
really
the
like
anvil.
you
The
to be
head's
vice
starting to work its way
president.
off.
He goes,
All right. go.
okay, I'll do it. Caved immediately. Eric's been a blacksmith for about 5 years or so. He's been a blacksmith for what, 10 years. He's been on the board for about 5 years. He likes making tools, knives, and equipment. Frank and Steve has been his mentors. Eric Bruner.
Okay, next question. Yeah. So is it what? Is it? Oh, it is working off the stand, isn't it? Oh, that's Eric's fault. Okay, thank you. Now, yeah.
Yes, he does.
More questions? Yeah. That's a good question. So, what's my favorite thing to make at home? Probably tools. You know, tools. For the work that I do with the Mokame, I forge to usually within like 10,000ths of an inch of what my customer wants. But it's almost all flat bar or round bar type work. So it's not complex, but to do that, I've made tools for my power hammer so that I can hold really tight tolerances. They're not complicated tools; they're just flat dies with grooves milled into them. But for me, making tools it lets me use a lot of the different skills that I have. This one here is actually a good example. I brought this. This is a tool that I used when making some of the practice hammers that I did. It's a set of spring fullers, so it's not really a complicated tool exactly. A lot of you have probably seen this. This one is forged all out of one piece, and so because of that, it's a little bit more complicated because you have some geometry, a little bit of math to do to figure it out, which I enjoy. This piece was forged from 1 5/8 round, about 20.5 inches long. And so what I did, and the part that I enjoyed about the project was designing the tool. This radius in here is 2 1/4 inches. So I needed to figure out how much material I was going to start with and what size I wanted to start with. And so figuring out the size was probably the first step. And to do that, I needed to know what the cross-section, the cross-sectional area is of this half round, right? So that's 2 1/4 divided by 2, or the area of a circle, 2 1/4 inch diameter divided by 2. Once I had that, then I could find a standard dimension material that had the same cross-section. So it turns out that half of a 2 1/4 diameter circle has the same cross-section as 1.5 inch round. The reason that was helpful was because I could make a 2 1/4 inch diameter swage, put an 1.5 inch round bar in it, flatten it, and it fills the tool, and you're done. I don't have to do much more after that. And then the rest of it was just calculating what I needed for a length between this point and this point, what diameter I needed so that when these guys are parallel, they're going to have the spacing that I want for the object that I'm making, and calculating the volume and converting that volume calculation into the number of inches I needed of 1 5/8 round. So I really enjoy projects like that. Yeah. So that tool is made out of a grade that most closely resembles 50B60, which is not something we see around here very often. That started off as a guide pin from a plastic injection molding machine that I got from a guy. I believe the material was probably actually a European grade, but that was the closest I could find in the US system. So something similar to that would be 5160, but it's not quite the same, but similar to that. More questions? Yeah. Yeah.
What order are you doing it? I see you flipping the tool 90 degrees and forging one end.
Right?
Is the next operation at the other end, or do you continue forging one side?
I'll probably, so the question is the order of operations in making this hammer. What you're seeing is that the working out this transition, this step from here down to here. Of course, it's the same on the bottom, and when you go 90 degrees, you get this one here. I will work all on one end. What I'll do when I get this dimension, the size that I want, then we'll go at the 45s to create the octagon. And I'm going to do that all with this, this tool here. Got to get everything roughed in, and then we'll switch to the bigger fullers. But I didn't want to start with great big fullers at 2 1/4 and try and do that with just hand hammers. That's a lot of heavy work. So we're kind of cheating a little bit and going with the smaller tool radius first. So we'll do one end, and we'll flip it around and do the other end, and then draw down the middle. And once that's down, then we can start the eye. More questions? Yeah. So for the hammer, I'm using a grade called 4130. Oh, on the spring fullers, that was 50B60, or something similar would be 5160. And I didn't do any heat treat to that. I just forged it out and then just used it as forged. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay, good question. How long did it take me to make the anvil? So I was actually working on that for a couple of years. It was a project that I did after work and on the weekends, and just kind of when I could find time to work on it. You know, cutting out the shape was pretty straightforward because that was done on a machine-controlled torch table. So once the program was created, that cutting went pretty fast. But the real time and effort was in welding everything together. And then if you come up at some point, and feel free to do that when the demo's done, the hardy holes in here are square. They're 1.5 inches square. And the way that I did that was I drilled down through the face of the anvil right out, and you'll see there's a round hole underneath. About 2.5 inch, 2 5/8 inch diameter hole, went straight down through the face. And then I counterbored the top of that for a 3-inch diameter. Oh, I'll finish that in a minute.
All right.
Who's next?
Brian Thompson has been on the board for, ever. He's also headed up at Quadstate. He's been smithing for over 35 years. Started learning at Emmett. He likes doing household implements. Larry Woods has been one of his mentors. Now, Brian is one of the people that Sofa cannot live without. He fixes everything for us. Nice. Go. Brian Thompson. There's several people who really carry the load around here, and I'm probably missing people, but Brian's one of them. He does an awful lot of work around here, and we really appreciate him.
Just pile coal right up on top of that and crank the blower way up.
All right, true
It's really
story.
cold.
I'm going to bust out one of our local celebrities here, and he has no idea what I'm talking about. Very first time I came to a SOFA meeting, there was this terrible demonstrator named Michael Bendelay. And for those of you who don't know Michael Bendelay, he is a very, very, very talented artist blacksmith. But he was making flowers. This is my first meeting ever. I didn't want to make flowers, I wanted to make knives. Does that sound familiar to anybody? I never, ever, 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 ever wanted to make a flower. So the funny thing about it is you don't know where life's going to take you. Until last year, I had probably made hundreds of flowers and only completed one knife. And it's his fault. Michael. Next person, Steve Roth. That's a good one. All righty. All right, where's Steve? Is he here? Is he back yet? Here he is. All right. Yeah, this one is unknown to most people. Steve is really one of the main driving forces behind SOFA and has been for many, many, many years. He's been smithing for 40 plus years. Now, something else about Steve is he's shy. He doesn't want to take credit for what he does. He doesn't want to be in the limelight. But oh my goodness, the work this man does is incredible. And he has really mentored me through this process this year. Larry Woods has been one of Steve's mentors and guided him along the path. Steve likes ornamental ironwork. Nice. Steve Roth. All right, you folks are in for a treat tonight. And for those of you who don't know this, this is Honest Bob Cruikshank. He is a living legend. Actually, if you look up in the Bible and you see the references to blacksmith, you're going to find Bob's name. He's been around that long. So Bob has influenced many, many people in the blacksmithing community. He also has a menagerie of tools. Bob sells our SOFA fire pots and basically any kind of blacksmithing tool you guys might want. Bob's had his fingers on it sometime. So if you need anything, Bob's the one to ask. Bob also does a ton of stuff around the club. He's responsible for getting the forge hoods for us, the anvil stands, many, many things. Bob's been in charge of clinics for a long time. He currently works on tooling. He likes colonial hardware, and his favorite mentor was Bob Zeller. And like I said, you're in for a treat. Not many people have actually seen Bob swing a hammer. It is rare. You hear that, everybody? He said he quit swinging the hammer when he got one of those. So, all righty, here's Bob Cruikshank. Bob Cruikshank.
All right, more questions while that reheats? There's two of you. One, yep. You'll have to ask her that. I'm sure she's here somewhere. Oh, she's right behind you. What was the question? Oh, no, no. I know I don't have all those done. There was another question, yeah. On average, you figure about 3% of the starting weight. So it's pretty normal when you bring an ingot out of a furnace and start to squeeze on it for the first time to see the scale come off in plates about 1/4 of an inch thick. Yep. Oh, I got two of the, yes. Why? This one is taking a long time to get this piece hot. The coal here, I think actually we just need a bigger forge for something this size. We're able to get one side hot but not the other uniformly. And
Who asked that question?
the guy right in the back.
All right, you're not supposed to notice that at all. Don't pay any attention to the man behind the curtain. All right. All right, here's another story about a mentor. Do any of you know what an old coot is? If you look it up in the dictionary, you're going to see that man's picture right there. Raise your hand, Don yours. Don yours. All right.
Hey, Don,
These
how you
guys
doing?
kind of adopted me, and their teaching method was very simple. They would let me go and play and do whatever I wanted. Then they would laugh at me and embarrass me, and then they tell me how to do it right. And I appreciate that, Don. Don yours, Larry King, or Larry Clark, John King, all mentors of mine. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
How many guys do we have left to go through here?
1, 2. All right. Who's the guy up at the top who's noticing things he's not supposed to notice? Close your eyes. We're moving on. Patrick, you want to explain what we're going to do next?
Yeah. So knowing that a demo with this size stock and handwork was going to take some time, I went ahead and worked several pieces to different stages. So we're gonna fast forward. Imagine that we've had a whole bunch of people up here striking on this thing for about 3 hours. We're gonna jump to the point of punching the eye. And at this time, I need to have that Damascus block back if it's gonna have a chance to go all the way around. Maybe? Anybody still have that? It's it didn't get very far. Pass it around and let everybody have a chance to see it because it's etched right now. Once I get it hot again, that pattern won't be as visible. Once it comes back around, we're going to take that one piece out of the gas forge, get that Damascus piece hot so we can put the eye in that too before the end of the evening. While that's happening, are there more questions?
We
Yeah.
still got like 4 people to go through, and then we're going to
Sure.
change
Yeah, I
up,
occasionally have to
speed
cool my
things up.
tongs, absolutely. Especially when they get left right in front of the gas forge like that.
No, we'll have to just make sure every time.
I try not to do that at home, but yes, absolutely. Absolutely, yes.
Okay,
What sort of common steel should we use to make a hammer, and what kind should we not use?
Okay, so here's a good question. If you want to make a hammer and you haven't done it before and you're not real familiar with the grades that are available, what should you use? The most common grade that I see people use who make hammers, and guys who do a beautiful job, and you can see a lot of their stuff out here for sale, is 1045. 1045 is a plain carbon steel with about 45 points of carbon. You can water quench it. It forges pretty easily, and it's not too difficult to heat treat. It's not likely to crack unless you happen to have a very unusual geometry or a forged lap in it or some other surface flaw. It's very easy to work with. The grade that I'm working with tonight is 4130, a little bit lower carbon, primarily because I had that and I didn't have much 1045. I can treat that in the same way. This hammer, the one that Gary was using here, was this one is made from 4130 that all I did is I got it hot and I quenched it in a bucket of water at home. I took it into work and did a hardness check on it. In the as quenched condition, it was about Rockwell 52. I didn't really like the idea of having an untempered piece, for a striking tool, so I went ahead and put it in my kitchen oven at 350 for a couple of hours while I went and did other stuff in the shop. I haven't double checked the hardness. It's probably not a whole lot softer, maybe around Rockwell 50, which is perfectly fine for a hammer. Yeah, Dave. The question is, does my wife know that I use the oven for heat treating? And the answer is yes, I asked first. How would I do it if she said no? Okay. Well, she wouldn't ever say no. She might say, don't do it now, I have something in the oven. But in that event, and I felt like I needed to get the job done right away, how would I go about doing that? Well, there's a few ways that you could do a hammer, but a common way to do it is if you heat the whole head and you quench the whole thing, the part that needs to be hard are just the striking surfaces. So you can use local heat in the center of the hammer to draw a temper and make the center soft and let the heat run out towards the working surfaces. And once they get to the color, you can kind of temper it by color, and you would usually go for kind of a very light brown, kind of golden color. Once that face gets to that color, you can pop it back in a bucket of water to cool it off. Another way you could do it, so we can do that, and we'll do that tonight with a torch. But you could do it by taking a block of metal that it looks like a drift, and get a drift hot and set it down in the eye and let the heat work its way out. That'd be another way to do it. Another way you could do it, instead of quenching the whole hammer head, would be to just heat the face and quench the face. And that'd be okay too. More questions? Yes. How do I punch the hole? I'm going to show you how I punch the hole here in just a minute. That's a fantastic question, though, and we'll talk about the tooling for that. I'm good, actually, but thank you. What we're going to do is we're going to clean the anvil off and get these tools. Actually, now I'm going to let you with the gloves do that. We'll have Tim handle that part. So punching the hole requires a tool called a punch. And I've got a bunch here I can kind of show you since you asked what they look like. Okay? So these are punches. And you can make punches in all different shapes and sizes to do different things. At work, almost all of our punches are round. When we want to put a hole in something at work, it's almost always going to be a round hole in the end anyway. So our punches are just round. And and this is one difference. We're not going to go with that tool yet. The one difference between what we do at work and what I do at home is that when I punch at home on the anvil, I don't have a bottom die, right? What I do is I drive a tool down through the workpiece, and when I get to the back side, there's usually a little black spot in the shape of whatever my tool is. And I flip the workpiece over, I line my punching tool up on that black spot, and I drive it back through. And so in that situation, the workpiece becomes the die for letting me shear off the slug. Now at work, we don't do that. That's a less efficient way when you have big equipment. So what we'll do at work is we actually, since all of our holes that we make are round, we have a great big plate that has a round hole in the center, and that hole is counterbored. And I think it's about 14 or 16 inch diameter in the counterbore. And then we make an insert that fits that counterbore. And the insert can have any diameter hole we want, from about 2 inch up to about 12 inch. And so what you'll do is you take your workpiece, which is typically a big cylinder, you set it on this plate, you get it lined up. The plate has big rings machined in it for reference so the guys can eyeball where that needs to go. Then they take their, basically it's just a round cylinder of metal, set it up on top, and they start pushing it through the metal. And the tools themselves are only about that tall. So when you have something that's this tall that you want to put a hole through, you have just little round blocks that go up on top. So you push so far, then it comes even with your workpiece, you put a block on top, you push again, and you keep doing that until the tool drops out the bottom. And then when that happens, then all the tools will fall out and you get them out of the way. What's really interesting about that I find interesting when I'm from a metal control standpoint and understanding how metal moves and how to get it to do what I want, every time we do that, the amount of metal that we lose is usually a slug that's not any taller than the diameter of the tool that we've driven through it, right? Even if my workpiece is that tall that I want to put a hole in, it could be 5 feet tall, I'm still only going to lose about that much metal. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. All the rest of the metal stays in the workpiece, because what happens is my workpiece, my tool, sits up on top, and I push it in, and the metal that's underneath the workpiece, it doesn't just automatically start to extrude out the bottom of the tool. It actually flows away. The metal, when it's that hot and you have that much tonnage, it's really kind of almost like Play-Doh. And so it's going to move away from your tool. So you keep pushing that in, pushing that in, pushing that in. The metal's moving away, moving away. So almost all of the metal you start with stays in your workpiece except for that small little bit. And if I was, let's say they cut a piece of stock and it ended up cutting it a little bit lighter than we need, I could actually save even more metal by, instead of starting that process over the bottom die, we call it a snap jug, but it's that bottom die. Instead of doing that, I could put it over a flat die, and I could actually push those tools just like we do here on the anvil before I go to the snap jug, and only take out, a couple inches worth of material. So I have some options depending on the situation and what I'm trying to accomplish. Right now, what I'm going to accomplish, hopefully, is to start punching this eye. What we're going to do before actually that's hot, so I'll start first, then I'll talk about the tooling while things are reheating. First thing I need to do is get that one, thank you. And also, when you punch, it's pretty typical to use a lubricant. And I'm going to warm this punch up before I start this. There's a lot of different lubricants available. The reason that you do it is to try to keep the tool from sticking into the work. So I'm going to use what we use at work, which is a graphite-based material that most of the time we actually paint on our tools with a straw broom. We sometimes do more complicated and intricate forgings where we need to have metal flowing into a die. And so we will coat our dies with this material. It's just a graphite in some kind of a carrier. But I'll get the tool hot, and then the liquid part of this will quickly evaporate and leave a little graphite coating on my tool. It's really, really black and really, really messy, so I'm going to work really hard not to kick it over on the floor. There are lots of other lubricants that you can use for punching. There's some folks like a material called punchies. There's molybdenum-based materials, a lot of different things. I can't say that this stuff happens to work any better than those. It's just what I had available to me quickly at work. I could just go and get a little bit, so that's what we're going to use. the tools that I'm using here are made out of a steel grade, a tool steel called H13. And at this point, I'm going to need those gloves. Thank you. The reason to use H13 for tools like this is they'll hold up to the heat better. You can get them hotter before they start to deform, but they will deform if they get too hot and you keep hitting them. So what you'll see is that we're going to start to drive this, and at some point we'll get it into the work deep enough that the end will actually turn red hot. At that point, I'm going to stop, and even if the workpiece were still hot enough to keep going, I'm going to stop and put it back because I don't want this tool to mushroom inside the work. If that happens, I won't be able to get it back out. Now, you have a victim, right?
Yes.
All right. Good. Now, you're done with that. I need that, and I'm looking for the big tongs and the tong. Okay. All right. Here we go.
All right, as Patrick put it, our next victim is Mike Brennan. He's one of our newer members to the board, but he is also Johnny on the spot. He is largely responsible for doing a lot of work around the clubhouse to make it nice for everybody. He helps out on the Wednesday nights, open forge, and just, I've been here a few times during classes and he's been working his butt off the entire class just to make sure that things work around there, they look nice, and he takes care of business. Mike has been smithing about 7 years. He appreciates the utilitarian iron. Steve, Frank, and Bob Cruikshank are his mentors. Mike Brennan.
We were actually able to get that eye started on both sides, and you noticed I was kind of flipping hands with the tool, with the punch. The reason I did that was because I know that punch is not perfectly symmetrical, and I don't know that my workpiece is perfectly uniformly heated. So I'm trying to make sure that my hole that I'm punching stays on center. And so that's why there was all that kind of dancing around. And I'm going to continue to do that as I work this out, because that's one of the most important parts of the whole project, is keeping that eye on center. No, it's not. I'll bring it over and show it to you here in just a minute. You may taste test it if you want to prove that it's 4130. So I was asked about what the end of my chisels look like, my punches here. I've got a couple here. I could pass around. I can do that too, sure. I can do that too. They are not sharp. These are blunt. They're probably 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch, flat rectangles. Okay. You can make them sharp, and I've even seen some folks will grind them to a bit of a point so that they'll register in a center punch mark. I didn't do that, but that's certainly a fine way to make those tools. Yeah. Okay, so I'm fortunate that at work I have access to some small furnaces that are controlled, and I have all the reference material to guide me with what temperatures to use. The way that we did these, let's see, you would austenitize H13 at 1850 or 1900 degrees and air cool it, and then you'd go back and temper it depending on the hardness that you want. So these tools that I'm using right now, I think we originally had them tempered at like 1120, and they were so hard they were denting my hammer. I thought that was a bit too hard. So I went back and I had them tempered again, and we got them down to about Rockwell 43. I think we tempered around 1150 or 1175. I'd have to look at the charts again to get the exact temperature. I made a tool, just a hardy cutter for the anvil out of H13 this week, just in case anybody needed it this weekend. That one is Rockwell 48. It was double tempered at 1130. Yes, you air quench that grade. That is not, in these section sizes, it's not a liquid quench. If you make great big die blocks out of it for die casting or something like that, then you might oil quench it. But in anything that we would do in a blacksmith shop, air cooling, it's fine. Yeah, Dave.
Is there a significance to the taper of the punch?
There is. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. So what Dave asked was the angle on the punch. I didn't measure the angle of the punches. What I tried to make sure of was that that was just a fairly steep taper, because if it's too shallow a taper, it'll lock up in your workpiece. You won't be able to get it out. So I did not measure that on the punches, but on the drift, which we'll use a little later, I actually laid that out and was looking for, and I can't remember which direction had which, but 5-degree taper in one dimension and 7-degree taper in the other. And I should point out, the way I did it was, that was if you were to draw a center line up this tool, it was 2.5 degrees on one side and 2.5 degrees on the other for a total of 5 degrees. I looked at trying to go 7 and 5 on each side, and it looked way too steep to me. So I went ahead with that. It seems to be working okay. Other questions? Other questions? No questions? Yes. How hot are the ovens? That's a very good question. So for those not familiar with coal, you can get coal fire up over 4,000 degrees. It gets really, really, really hot. Yeah. With a coal fire, you can melt your material, you can burn it in half if you're not careful. With a gas furnace, you can do the same thing, actually. I've done that too. Tonight, though, I think we're running these probably around 21 to 2200 degrees. 2300, 2350 is about right for general forging of most carbon and alloy steels. That's about as hot as you would really want to go. I've had a few situations where I got impatient and I cranked the temperature up on my furnace and started forging once the metal was so hot that I couldn't see that it was in the furnace anymore. It was the same color as the furnace, and I'm just sort of trying to find it by feel. And when I forge metal that's that hot, it cracks. Even when it's steel, it'll crack. And sometimes people hear about that when you're dealing with like bronze and some of the bronze alloys doing that. And that's just because bronze melts at a lower temperature than steel. But if you overheat steel, even in a gas furnace, it will behave in the same way. So there's a piece up here, the piece of steel in the back of the back gas forge that actually happened to. And once this cools off, in fact, I should take that out now and make space for that other piece. Once it cools off, feel free to come up and look at it. And there's one end of it that has a crack in it. And it's cracked because it got too hot. I put the steel in the furnace and then I went outside to help my daughter practice volleyball, and I didn't come back and check it soon enough. And when I came back, it was bright white hot, and it was too hot. So where's that Damascus piece? I'd like to get that loaded up. Does everybody get a chance to see it who wanted to see it right now? No? Well, keep going with it then. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are there steels that have a higher rate of scaling than other steels?
Yes, there are. The question is, do different steels develop scale or oxide at different rates? And the answer is yes. But you typically won't notice that unless you're forging a stainless grade. Some of the stainless grades or nickel, highly alloyed nickel, like nickel super alloys, things like that, get just a very minimal oxide layer.
10 series steel, basic alloy, they all scale about the same.
They're going to scale at about the same rate. We notice that different grades have some scales like to break away from metal a little easier, others want to stick a little more. So if you happen to be using 4340, for example, some tools or something like that, you may see that it has a different kind of scale than maybe a resulfurized grade. If you get something that's intended to be a free machining steel, like 1145 or 1147 or something like that, and you heat that up and forge it, it'll forge just fine, but the scale is behaves differently. So, yeah.
Intuitively, you think that the hotter the steel, the less likely it is to break. Why does it break when it's hotter?
Okay, this is a fantastic question. Why did the steel that I described, that I can show you, why did it crack or break when it was at a higher temperature? The reason for that is because steel is not actually a uniform composition. If we get a microscope or scanning electron microscopes or some of the really high-end analytical tools that engineers use, you can look at steel at very high magnification and you can determine that at very small regions, so along grain boundaries usually, you'll find that the composition is a little different there than at other places. And typically the composition at those places has a slightly lower melting temperature than other regions. So what's happened, like in my situation, was I had started to get melting along the grain boundaries. So it wasn't like I picked up the thing and it just drooped, or that it just puddled in the bottom of the furnace. I didn't have it quite that hot, but it was starting to melt on the grain boundaries. Yeah, Mike. We've got that one ready?
Yeah, it looks ready.
Okay, hang on. Is that one empty?
Yeah, this one's empty.
All right.
If you would have got it hotter still, would it have been better?
No, it would have puddled on the bottom of the furnace. If I had kept going, it would have just turned into a puddle. Yeah. Why do we use a straight-sided punch at work and a tapered punch here? Okay, that's a fantastic question. Why at work am I using a straight-sided punch and here I use a tapered punch? The reason is that I need to get this punch out. I'm not going all the way through in one push. At work, we're going all the way through in one push so we don't have to worry about getting it back out. If we were going to use, if we weren't trying to create a hole all the way through, which we do sometimes, we then use a tapered tool that will do that. I'm sure it does a little bit, but not anything that we ever really pay any attention to, because usually our punching is not the final size, or if it is, if it's the final hot size, we're gonna machine it anyway. All right, hang on a second here. I'm a little disorganized right now. Is that ready to go? Is that hot?
It was.
It's not now? It's hot enough. Yeah. It's hot enough.
All righty. Our next board member who's going to be striking, working on the punch, is Joel Worley. He's been smithing for about 6 years. He has been making knives for about 8 years. Joel is an ABS journeyman bladesmith who is doing some incredible work. He will be a master one day. Basically, he started smithing here at SOFA. His mentors are all of the board, basically. Joel joined the board of directors when Larry retired. Ow. That scale is hot. Yes, you did. Yeah. Joel Worley.
Is there a tong clip laying on the floor?
What's that?
Is there a tong clip? Sure, if I can get it. Yeah, here, let me have that. Yep. Can you see it? All right, so that's the.
What's the composition of which way you gonna punch the punch?
So that's where I'm going to punch. I've put a couple reference. I didn't drill all the way through it, just enough for reference.
What's the metal? Is there a reason that you didn't drill through the pilot?
Yes, the reason is that when I drilled the one I'm working on right now, one of the drills drifted off center, and I was concerned that in trying to punch, the punch would want to follow that off center hole. So I thought it would be better just to have reference indicators and control it without the hole. I don't know if you can see that very well. So there was a question about what materials are in this hammer. Those two big not bright, but the two dark layers just off center from one another are 4130, same material as we're working on with this other hammer. And then the layers that are in between those, where you have the finer layers, let me go back to like that. There, see the narrower stripes? Those are 4340 and 4140. So I'm going to go ahead and put this. Did everybody get a chance to see this up close before I heat it up? So the total layers in here is about 45 to 47. I was shooting for 50, but lost a few. Where's my... I need those, thank you. All right. If we can... Actually, that's hot enough to keep working on. If we can just keep a door on that one and get it up to temperature.
We've got 2 more victims. All righty, our next victim is Daryl Painter and Daryl Jr. Daryl's got an arm injury, so he's going to strike on him one-handed for a little bit, and then Eric's going to take over. Daryl has been with SOFA for a very, very, very long time, at least 35 years. He started out at Emirates. He likes ornamental ironwork and tooling. His mentors are Bob Zeller and Larry Woods. Daryl is also one of the people who is really responsible for the success of this club. He's Johnny on the spot, takes care of what needs taken care of. Daryl Painter. Thank you, Daryl. You're next, Mike. Mike's next. Mike is next.
Red. And so I stopped there. The eye is actually coming along really well. A couple more heats and we'll have it all the way through, and then we'll be able to start drifting it. Now, there was a question earlier from up in the back about quenching H13. And what I just did was kind of essentially quenching it, but I'm not quenching it in water. This is that lubricant. And I'm also not quenching it while it's red. I definitely wouldn't do that. But when it's not red, it's not too bad for cooling off more quickly. Some more questions?
How do you deal with scale, removal of scale on industrial forging of that size? Do you pickle it or?
No, we just machine it. You just machine it. Yeah, you just put it on usually a big lathe or a big mill. And it actually is a problem because it does wear out your cutting tools pretty quickly. So when the guys are doing that, they try to take a deep enough cut where they can get underneath that scale and have the tip of the tool actually in clean metal if they can. And that helps with speeds and feeds and tool life. Yeah. Yeah. For a drill? A drill. Yes. I should have showed it before I put metal in the fire, but the one that we're working on right now, I actually did drill 2 quarter-inch holes on either side of where I wanted my eye to be. The only caveat to that is that this is a fairly thick block. It's about 2 3/8 thick in the center, and one of those drills, I drilled all from one side, one of those drifted off center a little bit, so I have to compensate for that now with how I hold the tools. When I set up the Damascus one, I was concerned about that drift, so instead of going all the way through, I just drilled enough so we had a really good visible reference for the tool, and we'll just drive it. It'll be a little harder to drive, but it should be just fine.
You wouldn't ever put a hole all the way through it
You could.
and then drift it.
Yeah, you could. You could like just drill a round hole. Just drill a round hole like 3/4 of an inch or something like that. You will lose some material. On one method that's used commonly by Nathan Robertson, who I'm not sure if he's in the audience tonight or not, is to drill like 2 3/8 inch holes right next to one another. And then when you punch, you really don't have a whole lot of metal that you have to remove. You're just taking out the web, and then you can follow that with the drift. So yeah, absolutely you can do that. Yeah. Okay, so the question was when I put those drill references in the Damascus billet, did I use any special tooling? And the answer is no. What I did is when I forged that out and got it roughed out and I was done forging it, I took it while it was still hot and I wrapped it up in kale wool and I let it cool off. And it was still too hot to hold the next morning. So I was cooling it slow enough that I could have drilled it. Had I just cooled that on my bench, the 4340 has enough hardenability that I might have had a hard time with that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. You got another striker lined up?
Last victim. Alrighty, last but not least is Mike Ivano. Mike is our treasurer. He's also the person who keeps me honest. It's been unbelievable how much he's beaten me up. Oh, I need a receipt for this. What's that for? It's been awful. He's been blacksmithing for about 7 years. Started out here at SOFA. When I asked him what he likes to work on, he said metal. I was impressed with that. He also likes doing foundry work, knife making. Steve Roth and Bob Cruikshank are Mike's mentors.
Stop. Okay, time to switch tools. Yeah, that one definitely got red. You want to hold that up to the camera? They can see that while I put this away. All right, we're almost all the way through there.
Mike Ivano. I didn't just see you blow on the end of that, did I?
This one we're going to... with a power hammer and that set of fullers that I showed earlier. You could have done it, you could do it without the fullers. It would draw down just fine, draw just fine on flat dies, but because I wanted to protect the radius that I have in there, I went ahead and just used the fullers to draw it out. It worked fine. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. It's usually carbide inserts. Depends on what they're machining. There are some things that are like full circular tools, and like we've got a machine called a bar peeler, and on that situation, your tools are about that big around. They're big. They're big. Yeah. Well, let's see. We started heating those up before you guys all came in here. So I would say it probably takes about 40 minutes to get one of those big blocks of metal hot enough to work. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the question is, if you're going to make a hammer out of Damascus like we're going to do here later, how do you decide which way to orient the layers? And in my particular case here, I really didn't pay a lot of attention to that. And the reason is because I picked two materials that will harden in a similar way. So as long as they're bonded together correctly and thoroughly, they should behave as a single piece that just has different colors. If you were going to do something with different materials, you might have to pay more attention to that. So who's going to talk about Mike?
Huh?
Said who's going to talk about you?
I've been talking about me all night.
All right. Doesn't have to be super hard. Just go ahead, tap her in. Yep, a little harder. There you go. Stop. I hate when that happens. Give me that other hammer. All right. Well, that was kind of a bit of a flop, so let's put this back. I don't have another. Actually, no. We're going to do this. Hang on a second. Tap that in lightly. Just get it set. All right, now tap it a little harder. Stop. Good. All right. You don't have gloves on. Let me get that and drop it back in.
It's hot.
Yeah, that's why I've got gloves. Light tap to set it. We're almost all the way through this, but not quite. One of the challenges with this is as we get in deeper into the workpiece, we have more of the tool engaged and it has more of a tendency to stick. So I am trying to watch for that and because I don't want to get that stuck. Any other questions? Yeah. Say that again? Oh, I didn't finish the, thank you. Okay, so the question was, how did I do the hardy holes on this anvil? So once I had the anvil welded together and had the, the shape, I took and I drilled a hole all the way through the face, and I counterbored that hole for 3-inch diameter. Then I had some guys that work where we have a water jet. They cut a 3-inch diameter disc and put a 1.5-inch square hole on the center of that, and then I fit right into the counterbore I made, and then I welded it in place. Yeah, so it's better than trying to punch and drift through that much metal. More questions? I don't have one. And actually, if you think about, if you come up and look at this, and you look at where the hole is in line with the base, you don't have the clearance in the base to run a great big broach down through there. You could, you could design it to do that, but not this one. Yeah? That is a fantastic question. So the question is, how do we keep the outside of the furnace from getting red like the inside? And the way we do that is with a special insulating material. So have you ever seen the insulation that's inside a house? The pink stuff, right? So this is like the pink stuff, but it's a little different material and a different color, and it can take a lot higher temperature, but it does exactly the same thing.
So one of my first experiences seeing blacksmithing was I went to this thing called the Ringing of the Anvil at Roscoe Village, and a very nice farrier actually let me make a hook. Now, for an experienced blacksmith, making a hook is, 5 minutes and 2 heats at the most. It took me about 45 minutes, and I don't know how many heats, but he was very patient and very helpful. One of the things he passed on to me, which I think is a must in our blacksmithing community, is he says blacksmiths are supposed to share bad jokes. We are required to do this. So, where are you from, young man? Where are you from? Whereabouts in Ohio? New Lebanon. Did you know that toothpaste was made in New Lebanon? It was invented there. If it was made anywhere else, it'd been called teeth paste, but okay. All right. That was one of the jokes he told me. So I think we need to share things like that.
You have any more of those bad jokes?
Yeah, I got a couple more.
You're going to have to use them because you got more than I do.
All right, how we coming, Tim?
We'll give that just one.
All right, one more bad joke. So this guy walks into the blacksmith shop, and the head blacksmith isn't there, and the apprentice is at the forge. And he's like, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, I'm in charge now." He says, "Okay, well, how'd that happen?" He says, "Well, me and the master were working on a project, and he had it all laid out. And he said, when I nod my head, you hit it." I did. Wasn't that
good,
funny,
Mike.
Pete?
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Remember I said bad jokes, bad jokes.
You ready, Mike?
Yep. All right, whoever made the last comment, he asked for this one. So this old guy, he goes in to see his doctor, has his annual physical, and the doctor says, "Well, I got bad news and I got worse news." And he goes, "Oh, geez, doc, give me the worst news." He's like, "You got cancer." He's like, "Oh my goodness, this is terrible." He says, "Okay, what's the bad news?" He says, "Well, you also have Alzheimer's." The guy sits there and he thinks about it for a second and goes, "Well, at least I don't have cancer." Yes, I did. And you know what, Thomas? I still have a lot of that scrap, so. All right, are we going to bust through this time? Are we going to bust through this time?
We'll get all the way through, but we should get close.
All right.
We should get close. That's not too bad. A little bit off center on the one side, but
Yeah.
go ahead. Okay. Stop. Let's take a look and see where we're at. I think it's starting to come through. Oh yeah, it's starting to come through there. So let me do that, and let's get back. Go ahead. Try. light tap it back in, and now go ahead. Yep. Stop. All right, now tap it sideways. There it goes. The end's getting hot, but let me take that, and I'm going to show this to the camera. Get it back in the tongs. So we're not quite all the way through, but we're getting really very close. I don't know if you can see that down in there. I'm going to roll over to the other side, right? So you can see that center slug is starting to bulge away from the tool, which tells us, we're really just about there. We just have to get it back out to the outside and get it all the way through. So. So at this point, we're almost, you really just have the thinnest little bit of metal left inside. So the eye is, half the thickness that it was before, actually a little less than that. So that's going to heat fairly quickly. The one thing we have to really pay attention to is that we heat evenly on both sides, because when we go to run the drift through, which we'll do here shortly, if it's hot on one side, the metal's going to move more on that side than on the cold side. And we need to try and keep that stretching even if our final eye is going to end up on center in the hammer. Any other questions? I must say, if there's no more questions, Mike's going to keep telling bad jokes.
Yes.
Yeah. How do you tell it's evenly heated? You're looking at the color, right? And so when you heat up metal, it changes color. And you can see that the brighter it is, the hotter it is. So you're looking to see if one side's brighter or cooler or more dull than the other. Yeah.
In the industrial forging process, from the time it's removed from the forge, what's the processing time before they stick it back in the forge, or do they no longer stick it? They bring it out and they get it done.
Depends on the job and the starting size. I would say that more often than not, you do have to reheat. But the amount of working time you have is really a function of how big your starting piece is. So if we start with a piece that's, say, 40 inches in diameter and it weighs 40,000 pounds, we might be able to work on that for an hour or 40 minutes before we have to reheat it. On the other hand, if we're doing something relatively small, so small by my standards, right? If we're working something that's only, say, a foot, 12 inches in diameter, we might work that for 10 or 15 minutes, and then we need to put it back. It's important in our business not to work the material too cold. If I work material here, if I try to work it too cold, nothing will happen, right? I just won't get any work done. In an industrial shop where you have very powerful equipment, you can actually still make the metal move when it's too cold. When it's cold, you actually have the power available to do that. But instead of flowing evenly like Play-Doh, it'll actually rip apart on the inside. And so you can take a piece which was formerly a solid piece that, was a block, and actually create internal holes in it if you don't forge it correctly or you forge it too cold.
How many heats does it take then, usually on a standard forging?
So like a standard simple forging for us would be a round bar, but just a large round bar, right? So it would be normal to do a large round bar in 2 or 3 heats. More complicated forgings, like spindle and shaft forgings, could take a lot longer. Last week, we did a set of spindles out of a more complicated stainless steel, and it took us 4 shifts. And I don't remember, because, it was, you'd work on the material for, 5 minutes, and then it would crack and tear, so you'd grind on it for an hour, then you'd have to reheat it for like 2 hours, and then you'd work on it for another 5 minutes and try to get rid of the cracks and tears that were there before. And so that was a pretty long process, which we don't usually have quite that long. But that one, yeah, that was 2 days, 2 shifts working on it, straight through. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So the one that got a crack in it that I mentioned earlier, because I overheated it, well, I could work to grind that crack out, and if it didn't go very far into the material, that would be fine, and I could maybe still use that for a hammer. I haven't put any holes in that, so I could grind or cut the crack off and then use the material for something else. There you go, straight peen. That got. Yep, we're almost there though. Yeah, see, we've got the slug to within about 1/2 inch of the far side, so we're almost where we need to have that. What was that, Thomas? Yeah. Yeah, is that one hot? Okay. This one we're going to set aside for a little bit. Let's grab this one down here. How's the end of that look? Be all right to start with. Okay. Yeah, you said the Damascus one is hot? Oh yeah. Yeah, that's hot enough to start, okay. Why don't we go ahead and start the Damascus one? So if you look carefully, you can see the pattern even here while it's hot. And I might just go ahead and do some light taps to set this. All right, go ahead, keep going. Again. No, it sure doesn't. Try that. How do you think? That's not so bad. Go ahead. One more time. Okay. What do you think? Just a little bit, yep. Let's come after it this way. What do you think? Yeah, that straightened it out. What? Yep. Yeah, would you please? It'll be a little easier to get in there. Thanks for keeping an eye on all this stuff, Tim. I get, I'm all into it.
Set established one has people.
Mike, you ready?
Yep.
Go, keep going. All right, stop. Now knock that loose. 'Cause I'm sure. There it goes. Nice. Yeah. Okay. It's split, meaning. Okay. Good. Oh, I see it. Oh, wow. That's just about all the way out.
Yeah.
Tell you what we're gonna do. Can I get that? Putting it over that tool anymore isn't gonna help. Oh, okay. I know what to do. Yep, I want it over that one. All right. Have to reheat it. Just no, not that one.
get you up there. But,
All right. How's that Damascus one
yes,
doing?
it is. It's amazing.
Is it pretty good? All right. So that one's through. Let's keep working on that Damascus one just to get things set up. Then we'll.
Okay. Jeremiah probably want to do it some.
Where is he?
He's right up here.
All right. Good. Are you ready to go, Mike?
Yeah, I'm ready when you are.
We're going to start in on that Damascus.
All right. Right. Go.
Okay. Yeah. How's that one looking? Okay. This is going to take a little time to get hot on the one that we're ready to drift. So are there more questions? Yeah. Right.
In front of your whole punch.
Yep.
You're driving in there.
Yep.
Mine just on the different types of metal that you've got layered in there, what will it do with the different
So in
one building?
okay, so the question has to do with how metal's going to flow in front of the tooling, since I've got different types of metal layered up there.
The slug you drive out, is it going to have more of one and less of the other?
Okay.
What stage, what pushdown, what stage?
Actually, it probably would. I'm going to do a little drawing to try and explain that. So, you could get me a piece of chalk. All right. So the question was, in the Damascus billet, if we were to take a look at the slug that we get out, will we have all the layers in that billet of, in the slug that are in the billet? Basically, that's what you're asking, right? And so what we have is so if we just imagine that this is straight and we have these layers, so what's going to happen is I'm going to put a tool right here, the punch, And when I drive that in, this spot right underneath the punch that's touching the punch, that's not going to really go anywhere. It's trapped by the friction between the end of the punch and the metal that that's in contact with. So that's not going to move. But if I draw, like if I wanted to imagine where the friction is going to have an impact and where that impact's going to stop, I can draw some imaginary lines. And when I do that, they look kind of diamond or pyramid shaped like this. So this little layer right here will be trapped, a little bit of this layer, a little bit of this layer, a little bit of this layer right there. And when I get down to the bottom here, or actually we're punching through the middle, so we're actually going to catch some metal right here. So what will happen is this metal right here will actually get pushed down like that, and as I come in from the bottom side, the same thing. So it gets pushed up like this, and what I'm going to be left with is all of this metal here is going to move out away from the tool, and it's going to stay in the hammer, so that I'll have just this much here and some that was trapped down here that'll move towards the center. It might have a little bit of the center, but it probably won't actually have every single layer represented in that slug that I get out, because most of the metal in this area here is going to flow away and not be captured by the tip of that punch. Other questions? Yeah. Forgot? Okay, well, you'll remember later. Yeah. Okay, so that's a good question. The question is, why do I have to also drift? I've got a hole, why do I put a drift in? And so the answer to that is, if I'll grab here a hammer handle, and one of these punches. If you look at the size, and I should probably just do this here. Can you zoom in on that a little bit? Okay. If you look at the cross section of, or the width of the punch, compare that to the width of the hammer handle, you see that the punch is much narrower, right? So number one, I need to make the hole bigger. If I tried to punch a hole that big straight through with one tool, I could do it, but it would take a lot of power. If I were going to take that approach, it'd be better used like a hydraulic press and not do this by hand, okay? The other thing that's very important is that the inside of a hammer, I'm looking for the drift. Well, hang on just a second. Under the anvil, I saw Mike moved it. So the inside of a hammer, the hole, the eye of a hammer, is not straight, okay? It's tapered, but it's tapered in both directions. It's tapered from the top and from the bottom, like this. So when we put the drift in, we'll drive it from one side, and then we'll flip it over and we'll drive it from the other side. And when we're all done, that hole will be wider at the top than it is in the middle, and wider at the bottom than it is in the middle. And the reason for that is we put the wedges in there, and that's what locks the head on the handle. If you used a straight hole, you could get the handle on, but you couldn't keep it on. Yep. So we're ready for drifting. Okay. Now if we're going to drift, let me clear some of this other stuff out of the way, Mike. Do that. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to drift from one side, and I'm going to pop the drift out of the hammer. So what we'll do is I'll pick it up and I'm going to smack it on the anvil, and the drift should pop out. I'm going to spin the drift 180 degrees, and I'll drive it in again, and then you don't have to wail on it yet. Where's my other tong clip? That one's ready? Okay. Mike, can you get the punch that's in the tongs? You ready?
Not here. On a strike.
All right.
Dave.
So we drug in a bunch of pallets to stand on. It worked great. It really did. Yeah, it really worked out nice. Light to set it. All right. 1, 2. Stop. Tap it loose. Just a little bit on the end. That's it. Good. Now, that's just the slightest little bit off on that side, but and that. Good. Stop. Set that head. Set the head. Thank you. Set. All right. Good. Go. Whoa. That's all right. No problem. No problem. We'll go ahead and reheat it. Made some nice progress, though. It's good. All right. What? Okay. Should probably introduce these guys, Mike. No? All right. I'm good. How yeah, that's the one I made. Okay. What the?
It's kind of funny that when we start working on a hammer, the guys who make hammers for a living decide they want to get in on the act. So they make some beautiful stuff. I highly recommend you go check out their work. They do good stuff. Yeah, this is Aaron and this is Dave. Dave's one of our demonstrators this week. So.
Thanks, Dave. Is wanting to walk off. All right, stop. That's it. I missed the catch on that one. All right, this should be the last, all that we need here. This should take it right down on this side. Just a little bit. Yep. All right, good. That's it. Okay, that one's done. Round of applause for Aaron. All right, roll that over a bit. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to, I'm going to let this cool down for just a few minutes. Oh, sorry, Dave, didn't mean to move on you so fast. I'm going to let this cool down for just a few minutes till it starts to turn black. Then we'll reheat it and quench it in water. So I'm going to just set this right here. We'll leave the forge going. What I'm trying to do is sort of a real simple heat treatment here. When we have, just a second, when we have this hot for forging, we get the grains in the metal quite large, and we have other things going on. And I could quench from that, not from that temperature, but I could quench as this cools down. When it gets to the right temperature, I could just quench it then. But I'll have a better product if I let it cool down to where that that phase is transformed to something else, and then I can let it retransform, we'll re-austenitize it, it's what the process is called. The reason for doing that is it gives me some grain refinement, a little bit more uniformity of grains before I go into my quench. While that's happening, we'll go ahead and keep working on this Damascus hammer. Yeah. It's basically normalizing. I'm just not going to let it go all the way down to room temperature because I don't need to, and we're kind of short on time. So that's essentially that, yeah. Yeah. I don't know the answer to that. Probably a little bit, but you go too far off and then the hammer won't be balanced one side of the hammer to the other. So I don't think that one is 100% perfect, but it's actually not too bad. It's still in line. It's a slightly off center, but I don't think it's real significant. I don't know what your opinion is on that, Aaron. You've made a lot more hammers than I have. Yeah. Yeah. So, and you know, when you get towards the end too, things move, they happen fast. You could see that, you know, Aaron drove that drift in, you know, half its length in one heat. So if we had a little bit of non-uniformity in temperature there, or if even from the punching stage, if it was punched slightly off center, then, you know, it's a little bit harder to recover. It also depends on the style of the hammer you're making. If you're gonna squeeze the center back down and draw the eye out along the length of the drift, then you may be able to kind of recenter that a little bit. Here, we're not doing that, so we don't have as much opportunity to correct that error. But in looking at it, I don't think that's going to be a real problem. If you look at this one here, it's not perfect. It's not bad, but it's not perfect, and it seemed to work okay. So.
Hey, if it's perfect, we didn't make it.
There's that too.
Well, and if we punch it off center, you can. I gotta remember this. I always dyslexic is all get out. The side that it's leaning more towards, quench that when you drift it over.
Yeah, that's
Cooler.
yeah, that's definitely true. So.
You need a striker again?
I will need somebody to strike. Yeah. Let's see, we're ready for that. And we need this. Move that up a little bit. No, not quite, because I want a heat treat, and once I get the heat treat done, we'll be done with it. Yep. I'm gonna quench that one in the water. Yep. The one thing though is I know you wanted to stamp that. So we'll have to really like try to soften up, or either let it cool all the way down to stamp it, or I'm not sure how we want to handle that. Because once I quench it, it's going to be really hard once I quench it, and I can work on trying to temper it back in that area with the torch. We can work on doing that so that it'll take a stamp, but that'll take a little time. We work on that tomorrow. Okay. Well, I don't know. I'm a little nervous about stamping it and then quenching it because I wouldn't want a crack to run out of the stamp. So I think it'd be better to try this approach. All right.
I'll show you this. Mike McGee's got a Colonial sledge. It's wrought iron, steel face.
Oh yeah.
It's got a little trim molding detail.
Oh, cool. Have you made any like that?
I've made one 7 times.
Nice. Hey, Keen, how are you? You missed all the discussion about the anvil earlier.
What about a hack welder?
That's right.
Well, the crack of dawn, that man.
All right, go ahead. Oh. Escaping there. All right. All right, stop. Tap that out for me. Oh, actually, it's going to come out just fine. That looks like it's going to come out. Let me put that back in the furnace because that's going to pop out of the tongs. there more questions? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so so the question was, what temperature did I do my welding at? If you were to look at the back side, the back wall of this forge, and you see that white color in there, that's about what I was going for. Now I'll say that you can have, even in welding, you can have your metal too hot. And one of the things that can happen, and I don't do a lot of Damascus, and I actually hadn't done any for a long time, and I really struggled to get this billet to go together. So I went over to a friend's house who does a lot. He does a lot of Damascus for the knife makers. And so I went over to his place and we talked about what was going on. And what he was telling me was, you can actually have your billets so hot that even though they're not melting like I described earlier, which certainly could happen, and in the case of knife making materials where you have higher carbons, it'll happen at a lower temperature than what it happened where I was in my project. But you can get the metal so hot that even though it goes together, you'll actually have a your interface between your layer number 1 and layer number 2 won't be real sharp. It won't have a real crisp edge. It'll be kind of washed out. I've actually had that happen with some of the mokume when I've gotten it too hot and it didn't melt all the way, but I could tell it was right up there, and I let it cool a little bit before I forged it. Then once it got machined, again, that there wasn't that real sharp delineation between layer 1 and layer 2, or copper and brass. So you do have to watch temperatures from that standpoint. There's guys around here who've done much more Damascus than I have, and I know that you can actually weld at much lower temperatures than that bright white. The important thing is that you keep everything very clean. And so that can be done through a flux. Borax is very common, especially if you're doing forge welds to make tongs or ornamental work or whatever. You just want that metal clean. You can do it without flux if you have sufficient control over the atmosphere of your fire and your heating environment. And I know there's some guys who can do that even in a coal fire. They can heat and get things clean enough to weld without flux. I cheated. I hooked that, I put that in a can. I put that in a piece of 5-inch square tubing, and I welded the ends on the can, so I had a completely sealed environment. Then I put a bunch of WD-40 in there first, and then I drilled a hole on 2 opposing faces, and I welded a pipe about 4 feet long, a piece of heavy wall hydraulic pipe to it, so I could use that as a handle. And then I connected that pipe to an argon tank. And they're telling me that is that ready? That doesn't look ready. That looks cold. What? Whoever wants to strike. All right, Jeremiah. But that one's not ready yet. We're going to let that go a little longer. So let me finish this description of doing the Damascus. So what I did was the WD-40 was put in there to burn up any oxygen that was in the can when I first sealed everything in there. I put the argon in there to purge out oxygen while I was heating it so that I couldn't get any more oxygen there, so that I had not a vacuum environment, but at least a controlled atmosphere, which I normally wouldn't have in my forge. So I did that, and I took my time to make sure that the billet was uniformly heated. And then when I went to hammer it, I was using a large power hammer that I have. I was careful not to hammer it very hard or to do very much deformation in the first 4 heats. I took real light blows. I have a large hammer with large dies, so I could get the whole billet under the dies at once. Take a few taps, put it back in the fire, a couple more taps, back in the fire, flip it over, and do that twice. So basically tried to weld it, 4 heats. I didn't have to reheat very long, but 4 heats with just light blows before I really started to forge that out. And my the first can that I did had 10 layers in it. They were started off at 1/2 inch thick, or just under 1/2 inch thick each. And I forged that down to about 900 thousandths by 3.5 inches. Machined those clean in a mill, then restacked them and added the 2 pieces of 4130 that you see, those big dark bands, to fill up the space in my can. And then I did the process all over again. But the second time I did it, instead of going down so small, I only went to about 3 3/4 of an inch, machined off the can, and then finished bringing it down to 3/4 square and then 3/4 round for the project. And then once I got that done, then I could use my other tooling to rough out the hammer. All right. Yes, let's make sure this is all set. We're good. We're going to just start light to get everything set. Yeah, just light to get everything settled in there. All right, that's good. Now pick it up. Oops, go ahead. Oh,
I caught that one too far in. I'm very sorry.
that's all right. That's okay. That one fit? No, we're going to put it back in there. We're going to put it back in there. I have a little trouble getting the... All right. I'm going to go ahead and put this one back in the furnace. Now, when I go to heat treat this, or to quench it, I don't have to have it nearly so hot as when we were forging it. I'm really looking for temperatures about 1600 degrees to quench from, and we're going to quench that one, the one I just put back, in this big barrel of water. Water quenches just fine for this material. We'll have to rotate that a little bit and make sure we have uniform heat on it before we quench it. So, more questions? Yep. Right. So the question is, how do we heat up? And so in industrial work, it is different than it is here in the shop because the scale of our work is so large, and we're starting with ingots. We don't very often just load something into a hot forge at 2300 degrees. We might do that if it was a relatively small piece of billet material, but when you're dealing with the large ingots I was talking about earlier, you load them into a cold furnace, you heat them up, usually to around 600 degrees, you hold them at 600 degrees for a period of time, and then you ramp that up to some other intermediate temperature, hold there for a period of time, and then heat up to your final forging temperature. Sometimes on certain materials you might have several different intermediate holds. And the reason for that is because the cross-section is so large that it's heating from the outside in. Well, as it heats from the outside, the metal, of course, it wants to expand, just thermal expansion. Plus, you also have phase transformations happening, which also result in expansion. And if you tried to do that too rapidly, what would happen is you'd crack the whole ingot all the way through. It's kind of the exact opposite of what happens when you quench something and it cracks. In that situation, you're cooling, but you still have a difference in surface to center temperature and stresses associated with that. Yeah.
Do you use a thermometer or do you trust the dial?
For what I did, where I would temper that hammer, I just threw it in the oven and walked away. If I, oh yeah, even in a big furnace, right? So we've got furnaces at work that are bigger than this set of bleachers and deeper, right? So in a furnace like that, we do have requirements to control the furnace uniformity. There's industrial standards for what that has to be, and depending on what standards you're working to, that controls how tight that has to be. For my stuff at home, I'm not very picky. For my stuff at work, on a big furnace like that, what we would typically see for requirements is that from any one point to any other point, you could not vary by more than 25 degrees from whatever the furnace set point is, right? And some furnaces are even tighter than that. The tightest ones that we work with have a plus or minus 10 degree variance. Certain applications, they need to really make sure they have that uniformity. So it is important. And there are things in the furnace that can throw that off. I had my heat treat supervisor come to me earlier about a week ago and said, you know, we had some long pieces that were tempered, and we did hardness checks on either end, and they were really different one end to the other. And I pulled out the furnace chart, and he's got thermocouples going in the furnaces, and he could see that he had, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 thermocouples in that furnace, and he could see that the furnace thermocouples were telling him that he had a cold spot basically on one end of the furnace. He was able to trace that back to a mechanical issue with the flue on the furnace, and they had to get maintenance involved to get it repaired.
So how about them tailgate sails? Have you guys seen anything like that before? It's getting bigger and bigger every year. You guys remember Bob Cruikshank, the guy who has all the tools? He was talking to another guy, another blacksmith. I think it might have been that old coot over there, Don Yours. And he says, Don, if you can tell me how many anvils I got in the back of the truck, I'll give you both of them. Don goes, 6? All right, Don.
I thought you were done with bad jokes for the night, Mike.
Yeah, well. Stay back.
Oh, thanks, Jeremiah. I appreciate your consideration. Stop. Tap it out. Okay. Stop. Tap it up. It's almost out. Hit again. There it is. All right, starting to get red. We're going to stop. Put that back. Let's see how we're doing. A little bit off. That one's just a tiny bit off too, and I think so. One's going that way. I think one's going that way. That way. We're going to be all right. We'll figure it out. You know what I got to do is I need to flip this hammer end for end and work on the other direction some. Yeah. No, I don't think they're going to be too far off. They're pretty good. That's pretty good, actually. We're making decent progress there. All right.
I'm doing all right. How are you doing, Don?
One other guy with the
Yeah.
tool before, so.
Green side up. Green
That's all
side
right.
up.
Where are, let's see, where are the long pickup tongs that I had? Just like at home, I can never find anything, right? No, I had another pair. Yeah, thanks. I just want to roll this in here. Just trying to keep a uniform temperature in that one we're getting ready to quench. So are there more questions? You know, you can ask some off-the-wall metallurgy question if you want to. It doesn't have to be pertinent to our demonstration.
What's a good forgeable stainless steel?
Forgeable stainless steel for what application?
Nothing that needs to be really heat treated.
Just for like ornamental stuff?
Ornamental stuff.
Pretty much any of your 300 series, 304, 316. Yeah. The stainlesses are going to take more effort to move because they have a lot more alloy in them, but they work just fine. You got to be careful when you polish them so you don't contaminate them with carbon steel stuff on your polishing wheels and wire wheels and stuff like that. But yeah, they can work just fine.
That's what Nick was saying.
Other questions? Other questions? Yes. The worst I've ever burned myself. Well, let's see. Probably the one that looked the worst was on my upper arm right here. There's a scar. I was twisting some mokame with a conventional twisting wrench and it slipped off and I bumped into it. And it didn't look bad at first. I've noticed this about burns. They don't actually look too bad at first, but as they heal up, they tend to kind of run together, and so it looks like you've got this giant nasty wound on your arm or wherever. So that was that one. And then I have burned the top of both feet, and that's painful because you got to put your work boots on every day and you got to run right across the top of that sore spot. So that's probably about it. I don't know. Some of my worst burns are from the kitchen and not even from the shop. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any way to take the hardness out of that so you can forge it into knives and that?
You could, sure, yeah. You're talking about like high-speed steel milling cutters and things like that? Yeah.
Way to do that?
Well, you could actually just heat them up to forge them, right? Getting them hot to forge them will take away the properties they were heat treated to, okay? High-speed steels are forgeable. They take a lot of effort to forge. I've done a few of them, but they are forgeable. At least some of them are.
The more you heat it up in the forge before you even start it, the better off it would be to take a lot of that out of there?
No, you just get it hot. Once it's hot all the way through, then it's going to be as soft as you're going to be able to get it for forging, right? The challenge with high-speed steels is once you've done forging it, what are you going to do with it so that you can do something else with it, right? If you're going to grind it or machine it or heat treat it, most of the time in our home shops we don't have the equipment to do that because high-speed steels are almost always air hardening, and in the thin sections that we would be dealing with, they're definitely air hardening. So you're going to lay that on the bench and it's going to be almost as hard as you could possibly hope to ever get it. And then if you want to heat treat it, which you probably would, you usually have to have, for high-speed steels, most of them require very high austenitizing temperatures, well over what you think of as being able to check with a magnet. I'm talking 1900, 2000, sometimes even hotter than 2000 degrees. So you have to have a way to do that, which more than just what I'm doing here, you know?
I think it's getting too hot.
Which one?
The ones you quit.
Okay, let's take a look. Might be. I don't think so, but might be about right. Let me see it. Yep, that's fine. Here we go. Yeah, this one's water. Yeah. When I go to quench that Damascus one, I've got some oil here that we'll put into another barrel, and we'll quench that one in oil. The difference in the materials is their hardenability. Okay, so and their carbon content. This is a lower carbon material with a lower hardenability, and so to get the hardness that I want out of it for a hammer, I need a faster quench, water. The other one is a little higher carbon, 40 carbon material, but it also has nickel. The 4340 has about 1.5, 1.75% nickel, so it's much higher hardenability material. So if I quenched it in water, my concern is it would crack. It might not, but I am concerned that it would. So I went ahead and the guys got some oil for me, and we're going to do an oil quench on that one, and we're going to make sure that we have a torch set up so we can start a temper on it right away. With 4130, you can quench it and let it sit around for quite a long time, and it doesn't normally do anything. It's not likely to crack. 4340, if we let it sit overnight, even if it didn't crack, if I didn't temper it, it might be cracked when I come back the next day. So I'm going to need to make sure we get that one tempered right away. As far as the volume of quench media that you need, the 55-gallon drum of water is certainly adequate for what we're doing here. This is only going to weigh maybe 12 pounds or something like that. I would recommend a gallon per pound of whatever it is you want to quench. So at work, where we're quenching really big foragings, in my shop, we have 2 quench tanks that each have 50,000 gallon capacity. One's in water and one's in, we don't do oil, but we do a water soluble polymer, which has a little faster quench rate than most oils, but not so fast as water. And so we quench our 4340 and other materials that are more hardenable in that grade, in that quench tank. So, it's just a little bit warm. We could pass this around. Start there. The one thing I forgot to do, which I should have done, was to take and relieve the edges of that hole so that it won't bite into that wood. Now, I can still do that, although it's hardened. I'll do that after I temper it. Before I put the handle on it, I have a carbide burr and a die grinder, and I'll get around that and we'll relieve that. But I should have done that before I heat treated it. Yeah, I want to change this tool out. See, it's starting to mushroom just a little bit, and so I don't want to use that anymore. I don't want that to lock in the work. Well, I'm concerned it will. I want to just show this to the camera real quick. I don't know if you can see on the screen. You see how the end of that tool looks? You know, when we started, that was nice and flat. Let me turn it this way and see if you can. It's starting to mushroom just a little bit. Okay, and I'm concerned that if I go too much further with this tool without stopping to grind it, that it's going to upset in my workpiece, and I'll get it locked in there and I won't be able to get it out. So I'm going to switch over to a different tool that will perform the same function but doesn't have an end that's quite so abused. Yeah, right. I would just, if I had time, or if this was the only one I had, I would stop and grind it, dress it back square, and then keep going with it. It would be fine to do that. Yeah. This is H13 tool steel. H13. Yeah, it's a hot work tool steel, so it's designed to hold its shape and hardness at fairly high temperatures. But even so, you can still get it so hot that it'll deforge. It's forgeable. I forged these, so you definitely can forge it. But it, like many of the other tool steels, is air hardening. So once you cool it off, it will be hard. And knowing that I was going to use it in the way that we are, and it was going to have a lot of spectators, I took the time to actually have it heat treated, with controlled temperatures in a furnace, so that I had better control over what the hardness would be, because I didn't want to have anything spalling and hitting anybody while we're, yeah. While, like from this, when it gets red, and when I'm making it, right? No, I just let it air cool on the bench, but then I took it into work and ran it in an electric oven and austenitized it properly and let it air cool, and then tempered it. Any tips on S7? Off the top of my head, no, but you can find how to heat treat S7, I'm sure, out on the internet. It's a little different chemistry. Yeah, it is air hardening, but I can't tell you what temperatures to use like I can with the H13. I don't use much S7, mostly because I don't have access to very much of it. It's a perfectly good tool steel for these kinds of applications. We have this as scrap at work, and so I can get a hold of this inexpensively. We can turn that one on the right-hand side off.
Why do you use the flat punch as opposed to the solid punch?
Looking like it's staying a little hotter than the other one.
Yeah.
What do you prefer about the flat punches?
Mostly that's just what I have done. Not that it's any better. It may not, in fact, be any better. It was just
Compared to a ground one.
right. Yeah. Right. I've seen those, and they seem to work really well. I only have experience personally with the flat end one, so that's what I made. Mostly I was kind of in a rush wanting to get everything done so I could get, but that's really the only reason. There's no technical reason for that. No, nothing that elaborate. Light. All right. There it is. Stop. Tap that loose. Light to start. Okay. Okay, let's tap that out.
What was this deal?
41.4. Which one? Which was? That's H13.
Huh?
That's H13.
No, I mean.
Oh, that?
Yeah.
That is 4140, 4340, and some 4130.
Really?
Yeah. That's doing okay. We'll just keep working it like that for a little bit.
So I got a question.
Okay.
Important one. You talked about the size of this anvil earlier.
Right.
How often does this just become a table full of junk?
Actually, not very often. I have other big tables that are bigger than that for collecting junk.
Gotcha.
Right? The stake plate, the big welding table, there's other big flat surfaces. I actually use that, so it actually stays reasonably clean. But yeah, that's if I didn't use it all the time, yeah. But most of the time, what I'm doing with it is I'm straightening out those Mokame bars that I talked about. So I need to have that surface so I can straighten things up, So, but I could see how that could happen.
Easily.
Sure, absolutely.
The last week I've been rushing to get that one kitchen knife done, and I mean, it looks like a tornado went through my house.
Well, yeah. Right. Oh, for facing the anvil. That's Hardalloy 58. It's a Hobart Hardalloy 58. 58. They have a lot of different hard-facing products that are out there, but that was the one. I actually contacted Hobart and said, hey, this is what I want to do. What do you recommend? And they actually had a pre-made form for, here's what we recommend for rebuilding anvils. Well, you know where Hobart's located. Yeah. I think that probably Hans Piat or one of the other guys from years ago got with them and said, hey, we've got a bunch of anvils that are all chewed up. How do we fix those? And so I think they just sent me what they put together for those guys years ago. But it works great. And if you go around and you look at like the anvils in the U-Forge area and up in the other demonstration areas, if they're not a guy's personal anvil like mine, you'll see that quite a few of them have the edges that have been rebuilt, and I'm sure that's what they did. When I was a student and was out here more frequently, they had an anvil repair workshop, I don't know, maybe longer than that, 13, 14 years ago. And they had the sofa building, they had all kinds of welders and forges going to preheat steel plates that they could set on the anvils so they could get the anvils hot. Because when you weld, if you're going to do a repair on an anvil, or even like what I did where I made the anvil, you definitely need to have your anvil hot. If you weld on it cold, let's say you have it's like an old Peter Wright or a Haybutton or a Trenton or something like that, and you take a hard face rod or any other rod and you weld on it cold, what will happen is you will get a crack in the face right next to the weld, because the face of the anvil is a high carbon material. Even if it's an old anvil with a wrought iron body and a forge welded steel face, that steel is going to be a high carbon steel. If it's a newer, one like a Haybutton or a Trenton, one of the newer ones where they forged them all out of tool steel and welded them to a base piece that was a casting or whatever, they still used a high carbon material for that. So you have to treat them as high carbon materials. Maybe. You have to treat them as high carbon materials and follow the right welding procedures, or you'll damage the anvil. You'll actually make it worse. Good evening. And you are Jared. I don't think I know you, Jared. Nice to meet you.
Pleasure. Old Coot is mentoring in.
Who?
Old Coot.
Old Coot. Oh, really?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Let me get this ring up on there. Good. All right, now you can go ahead, hit it. Stop. Tap that out for me. All right. Tap that out. I'm going to tap back the other way. Nope, that way. There you go. Come back this way. That way. There it is. All right. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. We're doing pretty good. I'm going to spin the hammer around and put it back in there. All right. Okay, we'll just let it get hot again and keep going. That one right there, that's about 14. Okay. Yeah. I don't make that many hammers. This is for just for the demo here. I put together some pieces. I've done a few smaller ones for around the shop, but more often than not, I can find what I want at an event like this or whatever, or like that one in your hand there, or the one that was floating around here. That is my hand hammer. Those are both ones that Nathan has made for me. Well, he made the hand hammer for me. That one he had a couple years ago and I bought because I didn't have a regular sledge that I used in the shop. And I like his hammers. He does a nice job. But I've looked at Aaron's hammers. I haven't bought any Aaron's yet, but they're gorgeous hammers. And I think I saw some of Dave's when I was walking around yesterday. So, those guys are, making really nice tools. Yeah. Okay. Okay. What size did you make it?
It's 3 pounds.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I'm not sure where mine is. Here. So this is one that Nathan made for me. I asked him for something a little bit bigger because I was doing a lot of tongs, and I'm just about 4.5. I was doing a lot of tongs and working a lot this way, trying to do some shoulders, and I'm using a lot of, for my tongs, I use like coil spring, and I have some 1-inch coil spring, but I was finding that I just didn't get the metal moving the way I wanted with a little lighter hammer. So I went to that. Yeah, well, I do that on any hammer that I'm going to use a lot. I take the handles down thin. I forget who I first saw doing that, and I felt it, and wow, that's really a great way for me. It fits my hand really well to do that. But you know, it's nice the the lump on the end like that. Even if you're wearing gloves, which I don't do a lot when I'm hand forging. Even if you are, you have enough. There's enough of an end to it that it's not going to fall out of your hand, right? So you can still get going on it pretty good. But this works for me. But really, the vast majority of what I do is with a very large power hammer. And so my hammer is a big mallet, usually used for straightening things out, right? Because I have a big power hammer to do any real heavy work that I'm going to do. Steve, how are you?
Good, buddy. How are you?
I'm good. How long have you been here?
I've been watching the whole time.
No heckling?
Same group?
No, different.
He was asking, is ABS
Was we videotape?
what?
Was we videotape? Believe.
ABS?
No, we.
ABS, yeah. Sorry. What it is?
The ones that we own, the ones that we videotape.
For, at the VA.
At the ABS.
ABS, you videotape that, it's yours. As far as
No.
because there are people that come at ABS that sell the ABS DVDs. So,
Well,
actually,
I asked, what's his name? The big guy. I've figured it before. Yeah. I asked.
It's either that or
Actually, what I was, so we're going to turn it into a in between two big buckets. His reason for doing it was leave gap. Great idea. I was a little stubborn because I'm such a big The other one was that the
good. You're familiar with the camp? Well, I did a couple different labs. Okay. What else? Sorry. They were here. I talked to him earlier today. He's not doing anything. Family wanted to stuff there, so we waited for him to talk. I started here. Okay. Kind of a token last time I was here.
Yeah. Anyway, just interesting to see what they have there. Oh, yeah. I always like to visit other blacksmith shops or blacksmithing equipment here and there. Well, we were on a bus trip in June and we went to South Dakota. Badlands, and we were Mount Rushmore, Crazy Horse Pony. Mount Rushmore, they had this museum there that wasn't there when I was there before. And they had some blacksmithing equipment in there that they had in their blacksmith shop. See, they had a blacksmith shop there to support the operation. They also had a compressor building also for running air compressors because all this equipment was run on compressed air. And they also had in the blacksmith shop, as far as I could tell, they had an Ingersoll Rand, if you've ever heard of that manufacturer, and the Ingersoll Rand bit sharpening machine in there. And as far as I could tell, it was running compressed air because there were two pipes connected up to it. And then right next to it, then they had the Ingersoll Rand gas forge. I had never heard of an Ingersoll gas forge. cylinder exhaust drill bits a day for the operation.
That was cool to see.
Yeah. I should have brought a picture. I don't know why. I have pictures of that stuff also.
So is it a bus tour, you said?
It was a bus tour. Yeah, senior bus tour.
That you're going to a Damascus too?
Yeah.
Bus tour?
Over town there. I don't live there, but when I pass by, there's a senior center there, and they take bus trips all the time.
So that means it's great.
Yeah. We took one years ago. How Colorado and toured on these narrow gauge railways out there.
Yeah,
like
they are.
Durango,
Base.
Silverton, and a couple others out there.
You're
Some of them are.
You're going to be over there.